Icon Audio Arts.
John Lennon Superstar, The Strawberry Fields Tapes, The Lost Interviews, written by Jeffrey Giuliano, narrated by Jeffrey Giuliano. Copyright 2020, Icon Audio Arts.
Drugs were around then, you know. People were smoking marijuana in Liverpool, though I wasn't too aware of it at that period when we were still kids, you know, because all these black guys were from Jamaica, or their parents were, you know, and there was a lot of marijuana and that stuff around. The beatnik thing had just happened. First drugs I ever took, I was still at art school, had the group, we all took it together, was Benzodine from the inside of a Benzodine inhaler. And a beatnik, who was a sort of English version of Allen Ginsberg, came up from London and sort of was turning everybody on to this inside of an inhaler, and everybody talked their mouths off for a night and thought, wow, what's this? In Hamburg, because we had to work 6 or 7 hours a night on stage with no rest, the waiters always had these pills called Preludin and various other kind of pills. I remember Preludin because it was a big trip. And all the waiters were taking pills to keep themselves awake, to work these incredible hours in sort of this, like a Vegas type place, you know, it's an all-night place. And so the waiters, when they'd see the musicians falling over with tiredness or with drink, they'd give you the pill. Say, here, if you take this, you can work, you know, you'd be all right. You'd take the pill, you'd be talking, you'd sober up. You know, you could work almost endlessly until the pill wore off, and you'd have to have another. So by the time we got back to Hamburg, we weren't junkies, but we certainly had a supply of pep pills, as they called them those days. A guy called Tony Meehan, who used to be the drummer for the Shadows, which was the big group in England then, before us, Cliff Richard and the Shadows. And they'd split us, and then Tony Meehan was a producer, and we paid £15 or something to make the tape. We made it in a Decca studio, but it was independent production. And we recorded To Know Her Is To Love Her, Phil Spector song, a couple of our own. We virtually recorded our cavern stage show, you know, with a few omissions of repetitive kind of, you know, if you do Johnny B. Good, you don't do Old Carol, you know, on a record, right? So it's that kind of stuff. And there's about 20 songs, and Brian hawked it round, you know. And it's a rare piece, all right. Epstein would go down on his own on the train to London with this tape, you know, and we'd still be playing our gigs, earning a living, and then he'd come back with a blank face, you know, we knew he'd bombed out again. And it was pretty shaky then, you know, because there's nowhere else to go if you don't get the record, you know. And when you hear the tape, it's pretty good. You know, it's not great, but it's good. And it's certainly good for then, when you consider that all that was going on was the Shadow, especially in England. It was good for England. I don't know whether it was good for here, you know, with all the great talent that was here, but for England it was a wipeout. But they were so dumb, you know, they used to ask dumb things like, you'd go in, I wouldn't wear my glasses those days because I was too shy, you know, or you didn't wear glasses. We'd go in for an interview, the first NME interview, and they'd say, which one of you wears the glasses? You know, because they thought everybody was looking like the Shadows. You know, one guy wore glasses, the lead guitar, and every group in England looked like the Shadows and Cliff Richards. But we didn't, obviously, but still a preconception. So when they listen to these audition tapes, they're listening for the Shadows, you know. So they're not listening to it at all. They're listening like they do now. You know how these people are. They listen for what's already been gone down. They can't hear anything new. It takes just like one guy will hear it, or take a chance on somebody new. It has to sound like what's gone down before. And you hear this tape, and it stands up on its own. Strange. By then, we were pretty sick of Pete Best, too, because he was a lousy drummer, you know. He never improved, you know. And there was always this myth being built up over the years that he was great and Paul was jealous of him because he was pretty and all that crap, you know. They didn't get on that much together, but it was partly because Pete was a bit slow, you know. And he was a harmless guy, but he was not quick, you know. All of us were quick minds, you know. And he never picked up on the idiom, you know. And the reason he got in the group in the first place was because the only way we could get to Hamburg, we had to have a drummer. And we just heard that this guy was, we knew of this guy who was living at his mother's house who had a club in it, and he had a drum kit, and we just grabbed him, auditioned him, and he could keep one beat going for long enough, so we took him to Germany. And we were always going to dump him when we could find...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?